Welcome to Pixel Theater, everyone. My name is Nick Noel, and I am joined, as always, by my co-host.
Hi, guys. Ron Stratton here, ready to talk about a really fun movie.
Yeah, so Pixel Theater, for those who may be new, is a podcast dedicated to film adaptations of video games. So a very niche kind of thing. And on this episode, we're going to be talking about Doom.
At a distant research facility, the final 10% of the human genome has just been discovered. And with it, all hell has broken loose.
Which I think is appropriate. We've got two kind of horror ones coming up, and so these will kind of be our Halloween episodes.
Yeah, that works. And boy,
why not?
What a horror!
We planned it.
That was done on purpose. 2006's Doom adaptation, which is interesting because Doom, for the majority of people, Doom was such a cultural kind of shift in video games because everyone knew what Doom was. Good or bad, it was just forever associated. Like first-person shooters were called Doom clones, and it took a while that's still kind of just something that's associated with it because it was the first one to really break out for that.
And I feel like it was also one of the ones that people started getting concerned that this is what children or young adults were.
Yeah, and it's funny
playing.
because Wolfenstein was technically first, and that you're just punching and stabbing and shooting Nazis, which generally is not necessarily frowned upon. At least back then it wasn't, and. But it just, I guess Doom was just another level. I mean, because these things exploded when you shot and such a frenetic. For me, it was, oh, geez, I don't have a computer that can play this game. It's so, advanced for at least at the time. But
so let's dive into that. What was your experience with Doom?
Well, Doom, yeah, exactly. Well, Wolfenstein, I forget what Apple II or whatever Power PC Mac we had at the time would play Wolfenstein, but Doom was obviously a PC exclusive, so it was a big thing with the shareware disc going around, and my friends had it, so I had to go to my buddy's house to play it. I didn't the whole run originally of it. I didn't get to really experience it at home for a while, but boy, it was to me. I know it's always associated with ultra violence, and I've never looked at it as a game like, oh my god, it was just the twitch factor. It was the better you got at it and the faster you're going, you'd end up with levels where just everything was on screen. It was so kinetic, and I just remember it being exhilarating. I was like, you didn't see games move that fast back then. You're lighting things up, the music is pulsing, and it just really got the groove going. It's ironic that there's a movie based on it because at the time you were just Doom guy. You punched demons and monsters. There was a portal to hell on Mars, and you had to kill all the evil.
I think, my one and really only experience with Doom is I think Doom 2. So I remember playing it on PC, and just a lot of time myself. So I'm a gamer, but I've never been particularly good at video games, nor have I been particularly great at, especially when I was younger, finishing them. So I think I just played a lot of the first level of Doom over and over and over again.
Yeah, I mean, gosh, now you say that, I don't think I've ever really beaten the first two. It wasn't until 3 that kind of took on a more story-driven survival. Well, 3 is an oddball, and we'll get into that when we talk about the movie, because it's so much of the movie and its lore comes from the third iteration, which was mind-blowing in its own aspect. I mean, you look at quote-unquote the generations of games, and Doom 1 and 2 are these sprite-based kind of, they're not really 3D games, to get nerdy for a second. They're 2D sprites overlaid in a way that made you think they were 3D. It was a cool magic trick, But Doom 3 really kind of kicked open the doors to the quote unquote next generation at that time of how you do. I remember the PC Gamer did yes, this is a real still from the game, and it was oh my god, that's mind-boggling how it's quaint now. I think they run it on some Android phones, it's good. But I mean, it was revolutionary then, but it's so strayed from the formula that made me as a Doom fan love Doom, because it was curbing so much from Resident Evil 4 in that survival horror. It was very monster in a closet. Nothing really jumped out at you. You had a shotgun and a flash, and I think the big controversy at the original release, it's been modded since then because people hated it, but you had to choose between your flashlight or a gun. And I get the
I do
mindset.
remember that.
You remember that? I remember
yeah.
people just being livid about it. But I think it was encouraging you to explore and go and start shooting at things.
Yeah, and
it was so focused on that. You maybe had 2 or 3 enemies at most that you fought.
I never did. I feel like it was around like it must have come before Dead Space, but it was kind of like that same kind of time where like it was much more like you're in space and it's more about survival than like just going and shooting everything, which is
I'm not
what Doom was. Like Doom was just you just run through these levels and you kill everything, and
the second that song starts playing, that's all you're doing. Like you better beat that first level in like 50 seconds, otherwise you're a chump. You know, like it was just run and gun, don't think, just
like
twitch.
Absolutely no plot, like no understanding of
nothing.
Like, I had no like I did up until I watched the movie. I didn't know that Doom took place on Mars.
Oh, okay, sure. Yeah, I mean, you do bounce around on the moons of Mars. I mean, there's a lot going on there. And my God, okay, so we'll talk about the movie, but it's interesting because Doom's kind of really come back this year for me because Doom Eternal came out, and Doom got sort of a reboot in 2016 with Doom, you know, and it really just kind of it makes more sense now of Doom Eternal what they were doing, but they just completely rebooted the lore. Like you're still like this Doom guy, but now you're this Slayer, and the demons of hell fear you, and there's this huge mythology going back. Like you're this gladiator, and I don't want to spoil.
Do you have a name, or is it still just Doom
You're
guy?
Just Doom guy, really.
Okay.
And it's hilarious in Doom Eternal because they just go full 80s heavy metal cover. Like you have the Doom space station hovering in orbit around Earth, and you have like this little war room, and it's all like your weapons and a guitar and like your own gaming PC, and it's all this stuff you're Doom guy. You hang out in your apartment in space, and you go kill things when you're not doing that. But the lore is insane. Like nothing like that ever happened in the original games. Like it's all this history about these things taking over Earth and needing to feed off the souls of power. Like it's bizarre. So it's fun, and it was interesting watching the movie Doom and them being kind of afraid to break. See, Doom 2006, you know, right away the problem it runs into is because we're familiar with Doom guy. Like it puts you in the perspective of you're the guy doing it. But Doom 2000, like the movie doesn't know who its lead character is, and it's almost like a bait and switch. You know, spoilers obviously, but you know, the Rock ends up being the bad guy, and I think because he's the big muscle bound dude, you assume. Oh, he's
also the first one they show in the movie. He's the one who's clearly the focus of attention.
And
he's the one who's introducing us to everything.
I almost appreciate it if I was trying to think about that watching it without like pretending that I was going into it. Like you would think, oh, he's the guy I need to root for, and then it ends up being this other guy who you just would not suspect of being, Doom guy essentially. And they're really riffing off of Aliens. They're trying to get you like to feel for these Marines like you did in Aliens. It's biting from Event Horizon. Ironically, all these other sources but Doom, you know, like it's on Mars, but you know, the whole hell. It's funny how much they lean into the religious stuff, like with Richard Brack's character, his character.
It wasn't him. It was
Oh, that's right. I'm sorry. It was the other guy.
Richard Brake was the weird pervert.
Weird pervert was Richard Brake, but the other guy was like carving religious stuff. So it's funny to
that was an odd thing that they like sort of talked about, but only barely.
Yeah, they didn't want to. They were afraid to bring all the hell stuff, but they have this guy like embracing that.
Ben Daniels, I think, was it Goat?
Goat. Yeah, that's right. That's right.
I think so. Yeah.
I remember
interchangeable. So like almost everybody, they gave them one personality.
It's funny. The only one's name who really stands out, and it's a clever scene when they introduce the character names, because it's like they're all loading up their guns, and it's like Duke, Sarge. But the only name that I'm really retaining is Mac, and he just kind of sat by the door and then gets sadly beheaded. Like I think he's the only character that doesn't fire his gun in the whole movie. And Pinky is interesting. So Pinky was weird because that's not something really in the games, although it is. That's like a major character type you fight in Doom 3. But it's so weird. They're like, oh, that's just a guy in a wheelchair named Pinky. It reminded me of Super Mario in a way of that, like, we don't know what a Goomba is, so we're going to make it this. Like, it was just kind of weird. It was equal parts, like, not knowing the property, but also knowing the property, but not knowing how to shoot it.
So going a little bit into, like, the game comparisons, like, are any of these other characters at all present in any of this? Did they have to kind of make this up at whole?
Oh, they have to completely make it up. Yeah, none of it.
So yeah, that's what's kind of weird, right? Like
technically, if you go back to your first game, like you're a space marine, and like you're it's kind of like Half-Life in that sense. Like these scientists are conducting experiments and they open up a portal and oh my god, it goes to hell and everyone's wiped out on your team except for you, and you're the guy that has to save the day. And that was kind of the initial setup for Doom. This whole squad. So I guess that kind of it still does.
So it's kind of a prequel, I guess.
Sort of, because like there is a squad that Doom guy was a part of.
I mean, you could see like if they thought they were going to get a sequel, you could see this as like the setup to what Doom actually is.
Sure.
Because it ends with Karl Urban kind of going up to the surface with his sister, like all alone after killing everybody. But you didn't get a sequel, probably because you tried to make a prequel to the game or something. It's
just odd. I mean, what were the box office numbers? Do you recall?
Not good. Okay, so I think this cost, I think it was like 60 million, and then it made 58.
Yeah, I mean, it was a critical bomb. No one really liked. Even The Rock, like shortly after, would do events and he'd make fun of the fact he was in it. But I texted this to you. I think it's utterly adorable how into like the BFG he is. Like, I just like the way it's portrayed. He's just like, yeah, everyone's dying, but I want to go get that big gun. And he's just looking at it like it's a Nintendo. It's just like, oh.
I mean, like, and you could see that's again why like it feels like he is the main character, but he turns out to be the bad guy. So like, because he's kind of the audience surrogate, because it's like we all love the BFG. Like that's what we want to see play out, and they don't really give it to us in any kind of meaningful
I mean, maybe
way.
it didn't work, but being kind of like devil's advocate, don't you think it's clever? I mean, I think it's kind of clever. If I at the time watching it, like no,
I don't
think
it's clever.
Well, I just think it's kind of interesting because you would, if you went in blind, think like, oh, The Rock, he's our guy, and then like, oh shit, he's the bad guy. Like,
but that's the thing. It's like it's clever if you've done any of the work to set it up.
Yeah, I guess it's clever on accident because I don't think they plan to do that.
It doesn't, like, but it doesn't feel like, and then it recontextualizes everything, or it seems like they're giving any kind of foreshadowing to it. So it just feels like, oh, we wrote ourselves into a corner and now Rock's the bad guy.
Yeah, because I know they're trying to set it up, but it does kind of come out of nowhere. His like maybe I'm getting bad, so like let me just shoot everyone in the face. Like it just was kind of a sudden.
I don't even get why. Like it's sort of it's like it must be this interplay with wanting him to be the leader of it, but then wanting
it's supposed to be like he's following orders to the T, and I think he sees the fact that like Carmack, which is clever. Like the three guys that keep getting mentioned, like the scientist bodies that turn are all like the creators of Doom. So Dr. Carmack, once I think he made that connection that he had turned into a demon, he's like, oh, these are all infected. I can't let anyone get back to Earth. But I don't think they portrayed that very well, because all of a sudden he's just murdering people. I think they needed to really have a scene with him expounding on like, I've got to keep Earth safe, and then that would be kind of interesting. But
so like to talk about the movie, I was actually like kind of legitimately enjoying it for the first 2/3 even. It's a Alien kind of rip-off clone. It's it's got elements of better movies.
It's clever how much like practical effects were done. Like you have guys in suits. Like it's not guilty of like relying on CG poorly like a lot of movies did at that time. Like so it aged kind of well despite looking kind of low budget too.
I would say also part of the problem though, and this is kind of nitpicky, but like it doesn't make any sense why the movie is called Doom. If you were writing this movie, you wouldn't call it Doom. You might call it Ghost of Mars, for instance.
Sure, that's a good point. Ghost of Mars is more Doom-like than this, maybe.
Yeah, exactly. But like okay, so for a kind of B-level action sci-fi horror movie, it was doing fine.
Yeah.
Until it started to have these like twists of like, well, it turns out The Rock's the bad guy, and all these like convoluted things happening, and none of the characters were all that developed, even though they tried to be. Like this is again where like the two like who's your main character, because you are developing Karl Urban's character much more than he is on screen. He's kind of like developed through character dialogue as if he's the focus, but The Rock is the one who's like leading all the action, and we don't know anything about him.
How crazy Rosamund Pike is in this. Like, I know everyone's got to start somewhere, but she's such an incredible actress. And it's funny because it's a lot of talented people. Rock still feels new. I don't think he's embraced his leading man capabilities. Like it looked like he was struggling with the lines. But people were doing as good a job as they could with the source material they were working with,
Yeah.
But yeah, I was getting major Event Horizon vibes watching this. And
Sure. Like any of those like sci-fi horror movies, like you can make a case that they're like ripping it off. Like
I know
mine
why
was Aliens, but this.
But no, but I mean, it's definitely
Aliens
curbing.
ripoff.
It was definitely curbing from like that Alien squad. Like they're trying to be clever, memorable characters. Like no one's been able to pull it off like Predator did. I mean, Aliens is great and has some good, but movies like this have struggled to have such a memorable cast like that movie did. I understand why they did it, but the biggest like break to the action is that first person sequence. Like it's kind of cute, but like you got to excise. Like, it's just so jarring. Like
my memory is people really, is people who liked the game liked that scene.
It was
really into it.
I remember being in the theater and people clapping during that. Like it was like a yay.
So I didn't see this movie for the first time until it came out on video. And I think I was working in a video store at the time, so I just got it for free or something. Mm-hmm. And I remember thinking that was the dumbest thing ever, and thinking it was real.
Well, it
stupid.
Definitely hasn't aged
also
well because
came out of nowhere. Like
the scientists, like zombies, the way they kind of just reminding me of like House of the Dead, but in a really bad way. Like not the movie. Well, it kind of did, but like just the way the game would do it. It felt too. I don't know. There's a way of doing that. They didn't do it right.
Yeah, where it definitely felt like the kind of like you were talking, that pop-up House of the Dead style, where like it's not exactly a 3D game, so they're not going to walk towards you, but they may like throw stuff at you or something.
I mean, add a little bit of grain to it, and it looks like a Sega CD sequence. Like it totally reminded me of like
what is that? What was that Aerosmith game where like
Revolution X?
Revolution X.
Yeah, that's exactly that type of technology. That's totally what that looked like.
Mm-hmm. And like but it also like removes any kind of threat it feels from the monsters.
It felt very schlocky, like the only part of that gets quote unquote good is his battle with Pinky and the chainsaw bit. Like that, it was cool, but at the same time, at that point, the music's just so overpowering. It's like, and it didn't work.
And
the whole sequence.
So
I
think the idea, from what I understood, is he's like kind of dying, or he's very injured.
Well, because they set up the whole thing with the aliens and that extra chromosome, and she's got it isolated, and she gives it to him.
Is that what it is? Okay.
Yeah. So she's isolated that compound, and that compound is what's spreading. And if you're a bad person, you turn into a demon. But she knows her brother is good because he's a good guy and he's her brother. So she gives it to him, knowing he'll just become a superhero.
It's a moralistic tale.
I mean, no, seriously, that's where they're going with this. So instead of like introducing hell, the people that turn into demons had psychopathic traits or whatever. It's like one line of dialogue that just kind of goes boop, and
but isn't that saying then that like everybody up until Carl Urban was a bad person? Like all the scientists, everybody.
They kind of set that up because there's like 4 or 5 scientists who were saying, "No, please don't shoot me." That were bitten, so they would have been good too. But then he shot them in the head.
But they weren't superheroes.
They weren't.
Like this is where it kind
allegedly
of once. So either nothing will happen, or you'll become a demon, or you'll be a superhero, and it kind of just depends on what kind of person you are.
Yeah, basically.
That's how chromosomes work.
Yeah, well, sure. When you're screenwriting on cocaine, of course it makes sense. But that's how they introduced the first person sequence. Like he's pumped up like on 20 Red Bulls, and because he's got that, and now he's able to fight the Rock, who's the evil version of that because he is infected too. So he's also super strong, but he went the other way because he's bad.
Yeah, and like I wish they'd like. So there's so many like steps they could have taken to justify that ending. Yeah, like a little bit of foreshadowing on the part of the Rock, or in any way. And also like set up their relationship as a little bit more antagonistic, or the opposite, that they're really good friends until like the Rock turns. But like I feel like Carl Urban is like barely present through the first third of the movie, and where it's really just focused on Rosamund Pike and the Rock and I think Mac. I don't remember, not Mac, but
I remember going like, who's this guy when this came out? But boy, Carl Urban's fun. Like he does really good in movies like this because Dredd is just so entertaining.
Yeah, I need to go back and watch Dredd.
Dredd is so good. Like halfway through this, I was like, I wish I was watching Dredd. Like that's just so fun.
It made me want to watch the first Star Trek remake, the reboot.
Oh yeah, yeah, I get
like
that.
where he's McCoy in that. That would have been, that was just so many better movies to watch.
Oh, she left me where my bones.
Yeah, it's just like, okay, sure, whatever.
Sure, okay, that works. So yeah, this is Doom, and it's funny because they did try to get this going. Like 1995, I think Columbia and Universal were like, all right, this is popular, let's make a movie.
Yeah.
And Arnold Schwarzenegger got interested in it. And like 1999 was when they were like, seriously, there were contracts and Arnold was going to be a Doom guy. And boy, what a vehicle this is for 90s.
It feels like it should have been a 90s movie starring Arnold Schwarzenegger.
Absolutely, because this is Arnold, you know, and it would have been so popular because it would have, like, people would have been like, oh man, like Arnold's going back to Mars. They could have played up the whole Total Recall feel. Yeah, but it's just him punching and killing zombies and demons and monsters. Like that would have been great. But Columbine, I kind of wish
they could just do it now.
They should do it
now. Again and do it now.
Because
with Arnold Schwarzenegger.
His was completely derailed because of Columbine. Like as soon as Columbine happened, like, oh shit! Like, and they backpedaled. Like, no more video games. Yeah, and so it sat in a drawer until 6 years later when they made this movie. So. So
was there a Doom connection with Columbine, or is it just that they don't want to do a bunch
weird.
Of guns?
Like that's a whole other. We don't have time for that in this conversation. But the initial reports was they were obsessed with Doom, and it was kind of a media generated thing that wasn't necessarily true. There's a great documentary. There's a couple, but the most recent one I've watched is on Amazon Prime. Mm-hmm. We'll put it here, and that kind of explores the real story. Like there wasn't a trench coat mafia; they weren't part. It was just a couple of like misunderstood kids. And one of them, it was released that he liked to play Doom, and that became a media shitstorm because people were saying Doom got these guys to kill, and that was a whole thing with.
It'd be like if I turned out to be a criminal, people would be starting to worry that the reboot of DuckTales causes you to commit crimes.
Well, I got to be careful.
This guy's just watching this all the fucking time. What's wrong with it? He's a 35-year-old man. This is a children's show. It must have embedded messages.
I'm very
causing
careful.
People to commit crimes.
I'm very careful about how I fly Flight Simulator. I'm like 10 and 2. I'm not trying to intentionally hit buildings. I don't want anyone coming
going
back
to that Jeffrey Epstein island like everybody else is.
I can't believe people are doing that.
What's wrong with people?
The internet, man. It's a thing. So so Doom. What's your rating for Doom? How many BFGs do you give it?
The first 2/3 I'd give 7, but with the ending I gotta give it like 3. So 3 BFGs.
I'd give it 4 just overall. But I agree with you that the end really just kind of lets the era. Whatever fun you were having is deflated by the ending, and it's just kind of like, all right. That's where you guys are going with this.
What do you to go into our next session, because we're deciding to have segments now? What do you think could have made it better? Like, what would you either changed or? I don't think you changed the cast. For the most part.
No. So let's say for me to make it better, do we stick with what we have? We stick with this director, like the movie as is, because I think
let's do it both ways. Let's say like, what would you do to make this movie better? And if you were gonna make a Doom movie, how would you do it?
Okay, so I'll start with how do I make this movie better? You set a clear line that The Rock is the protagonist, and he's the good guy. He's a good soldier. The team respects him. They work together as this polished unit, and sticking with everything the movie introduces and the lore that the movie establishes. Okay, it's a moral thing. Like you find out this thing latches onto your body, and if there is psychosis or some dormant thing, and it exacerbates that, and you start seeing characters that all like each other, but one guy happens to turn evil because of this, and then they have to take him down, and you see it chip away at The Rock, and I guess you just establish that more. Watching your lead turn into a bad guy, and by the end, he's worried people. He's just killing people, thinking because he thinks they'll turn, and like he's doing the right thing for him, and being kind of a Thanos in a way. And then Carl Urban has to step up to the plate, and it's more of a paid off. Like now he's the guy to take charge and save the day.
I would have just been even more like straightforward with it, where Rock. Clear protagonist. I think he's the guy who looks the most like
he's Doom guy.
Yeah. At least in terms of like what you kind of imagine that guy is, like kind of like built and solid or whatever. And just have Carl Urban turn into the bad guy and then establish their relationship as like friends or something. But Karl Urban was always kind of the guy who, you know, broke the rules or whatever, something like that. And maybe you don't need the Rosamund Pike character at all. Because all she's doing is establishing that Karl Urban's a good guy.
Yeah.
And we don't have any evidence of it.
Yeah.
And, you know, they just kind of get infected through happenstance. There's a scientist there who's also trying to do bad stuff. And The Rock wants to, like, leave the research and save the people. And Karl Urban's like, no, our mission is to save the research.
Yes, that's the thing. That's the character who does that. Yeah, and that's where they start to, like, butt heads. That would have worked.
And I think it's just Doom is not something that you should have complicated relationships in. It should be very straightforward to the viewer. What is happening?
We want to see the big muscle-bound guy shoot the evil things in the face. You know,
like I don't even know. Like, okay, but then so what do you do if you're just doing it from scratch?
So what I do from scratch is you kind of. Do you remember the movie Hardcore Henry?
Yeah.
So you completely lean into that. Like it's all first person.
So it's just a video game movie.
Well, no, because I think there's a way of doing it. Like you like so Doom 2016 and Doom Eternal oddly are very cinematic and do more of the story than it ever has. And it's all first person, and you see his reflection, kind of like the Doom movie did in its failed first person sequences. Like you see his reflection as he puts on the helmet and whatnot. But you just lean into that because I think what made Doom work is everyone is Doom guy, you know. I mean, like if I were to make it in the 80s or 90s, I'd love it to just be Arnold and it's just Commando 2, but with demons, you know. But I think doing it now, I think I'd want a very polished version of Hardcore Henry, where it's just, you know, it's him communicating. And it's funny because then you make it kind of like how the most recent games do it. Like you don't really know what side he's on. Like you could have the scientist on the panel, like, you've got to get all those people out. And then he just punches the monitor. Like you don't know what his motivation is. And by the end of it, it's just, he just wants to kill all the demons. And you just make it a fun IMAX 4K crazy splatfest. And it's an hour and a half. And you don't waste any time. It's just him shooting things. And I think it'd be entertaining. I think there's a way to pull that off and not make it exhausting.
So I'd personally like to see it more like something like, was it Lockdown with Guy Pearce? Like escape a space prison.
That'd be cool.
Kind of thing, like break in, find somebody, escape. So I think like either starting it where this movie seemed to be ending, where Karl Urban is going into like actual Doom video game, like by yourself fighting demons or something, or have it be like an infiltration kind of, one guy has to get in and figure out what's going on. But he should be alone. There shouldn't, like, get rid of the whole team stuff.
Yeah.
And it should be, be like more and more, getting more and more desperate and like having to use crazier and crazier weapons and find them. And like, until it's like what you were talking about, just like crazy, like going through chainsawing everybody, like whacked out on like super serum to like get the gate back to Earth or something like that.
Yeah.
Then also explain why it's called Doom, maybe. Like,
you know, it's funny though, like looking at all the games, none of the, I think it's just really the unspoken, you're doomed, you know.
Sure.
But they never adjust why it's called Doom.
This is back when like games like didn't really have to like, weren't like really about anything necessarily, and they were just about like, well, what are we putting on the box? What's going to sell? Doom. Big flashy. Because that box was really like,
it's iconic artwork.
Really
with him just standing on the mountain of zombies and like.
At no point do you do that in the game. But
of course not.
Whatever.
It's they got to do that Ronnie James Dio kind of, you know. Album art,
just metal as fuck. Like that's really what the game should be called.
And it's wonderful what the game's evolved into. I mean, Doom Eternal came out, you know, at the beginning of COVID. So for me, I was like, I don't feel like blowing things up with a bazooka right now. I'm worried about like what's going on. And I got more, like Animal Crossing released the same day, and it's so funny. I glommed onto that for a little while, but boy, when I went back and revisited Doom Eternal, it's just I mean, I haven't beaten it. I was hoping to beat it before we recorded this, and I'm just struggle busting at the end of it because it goes from like just giving you the ultimate power, and you're just flying across the screen and ripping throats out, and it's just spraying shotgun blasts everywhere. To like the last few guys, like these encounters had to be very accurate and pinpoint, and it was really frustrating for a while, but still a very good game. And like the tempo of it, the almost musicality of it, just like I got to keep moving. Once you stop, you die, and that turned out really cool. Exactly. So it's cool. It's just interesting the franchise is still going on. 30 years later, we're still talking about it, and there's still people playing it, and it's a cool game. So yeah, the movie, we deserve a better movie than this, but they tried, and we've certainly seen worse. But we've also seen a lot better.
It's so interesting how, like, in this instance, I don't know if I wouldn't probably change any of the cast really.
No,
I think the director was serviceable, for the most part.
They did an adequate job across the board.
It's either the writing or the editing. Or they didn't get the coverage they needed at some. So that might be kind of the director, because it does seem like for what this is, it was a pretty low budget.
It did feel a couple times like they ran out of money. Like they quit. They definitely gave up on the teleporting, because it would just be the camera over here. Zoop. Oh, anyway, we're here now. Like they did a lot of that.
The other thing I'll say is like they made a big deal about how that guy got bisected by the teleporter.
Yeah.
And I don't think that ever came up again. Like it felt like that's how they were going to kill something.
Yeah, you know what? Now you say that, I was about to say that's how they took out the Rock, but they didn't. They blew him up. Into that, yeah.
No,
that's interesting.
I was like, oh, okay. So here's where it's going to come in. They're going to turn the teleporter off. The Rock's going to go in half.
That's really frustrating.
But that's not what happened. They just pushed him through with grenades, and he blew up.
What a Chekhov's gun, because that would have been because he's got his legs up in the air. Like it would have been perfect if he just bisected him and he fell down dead. And like that, you don't need to blow him up with a grenade.
Like they were setting. It feels like the Rock's like, that's not how the Rock goes out.
Yeah,
the Rock doesn't get cut in half. He gets blown up.
It wouldn't surprise me. I mean, you remember hearing about Arnold in Batman and Robin? Like,
no, what was that?
He could never get knocked down. Like he had all these stipulations. Like, this guy's Bane's gonna beat me in this fight, but I won't take. Like, I have to still look cool. There's a lot of macho nonsense.
It's the same. I don't know if it's the same, because this might be a rumor, but it might be actually real. Where in the Fast and the Furious movies, like Vin Diesel and The Rock can never beat each other. Like if they're in a fight,
they have a weird pissing contest too with that. Yeah.
Like that's why I think there's in one where they're actually in a face-to-face fight where they knock each other out, like at the exact same time. Like
those movies are ridiculous. We should marathon those when we're done with these movies.
Or not. Yeah, that would be interesting to figure out what the next iteration of this is going to be when we.
Yeah.
Or maybe we just end it and do something else.
That's true too.
Or maybe we just do something more valuable with our time.
Nah,
I don't think that's going to be
The technical difficulties production.